I was standing on the stage of the annual hardware suppliers convention in Charlotte when I looked down and saw my son's face go completely white. He was sitting at the VIP table in the third row. He had a Cornerstone Supply name badge on his lapel. He'd been shaking hands all morning, introducing himself to suppliers and distributors as the future of the company. And now he was watching his 67-year-old father walk up to accept the Industry Pioneer Award in front of every person in that room who mattered. I looked at him for just a second, long enough for him to understand. Then I turned to the microphone, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up about 2 weeks. My name is Leonard Whitfield. I'm 67 years old. I spent 30 years building Cornerstone Supply from nothing. Started with a welding torch, a used pickup truck, and a lease on a 900 square foot space in a strip mall outside Charlotte. I put in the shelving myself. I ran the register myself the first 6 months. I drove deliveries on weekends because I couldn't afford a second employee. By the time I was done, Cornerstone Supply had 14 locations across the Carolinas and a reputation that took 3 decades to build. My wife Ruth was there for all of it. She kept the books the first 4 years before we could afford an accountant. She answered the phone when I was on the road. She brought sandwiches to the store on Saturdays when she knew I'd worked through lunch again. Ruth passed 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. We had 8 weeks between the diagnosis and the end. After she was gone, my son Gareth asked me to move in. He said he wanted me close. He said he wanted to learn the business from the ground up, and having me there would help. He and his wife Nadine had the space. It made sense on paper. I sold my penthouse downtown. I moved into their guest room. I gave Gareth a VP title at Cornerstone Supply and started walking him through the operation. That was my first mistake. Not moving in, not the VP title, believing that Gareth actually wanted to learn. What Gareth wanted was to inherit. There's a difference. The morning everything came to a head started like every other morning. I was up at 6:30, sitting at the kitchen island with my coffee and the week's purchase orders. I'd had that same routine for 40 years. Coffee, orders, a quiet hour before the day started. Nadine walked in around 7. She didn't say good morning. She walked to the counter, picked up my mug, and poured it down the sink without a word. "We need that counter space for the Keurig rack," she said. I looked at the counter. There was nothing there. No Keurig rack, just the space where my mug had been. I didn't say anything. A minute later, Gareth came in. He was looking at his phone. He poured himself a coffee from the machine Nadine had cleared space for and leaned against the counter without glancing at me. "Dad," he said, still looking at his phone. "We've been talking and we think we need to change the arrangement." "Okay, you're underfoot. Nadine feels like she can't have people over. You leave your tools in the garage, you take the good parking spot." He finally looked up. "We've been patient. But you're not really contributing anything here. You're kind of dead weight at this point." Dead weight. I thought about the 3 shifts I worked, the year Gareth was born so we could afford the hospital bills. I thought about the weekend. I missed Ruth's birthday because I had to close a deal that funded Gareth's private school tuition for the next 2 years. I thought about every decision I'd made quietly, without complaint, so my son would have options I never had. I thought about the mortgage on this house, which I had been paying through a holding company for 2 years, so Gareth would never feel the pressure of it. I thought about the 2 car payments running through the same accounts, the 3 credit cards, the country club membership Nadine had signed them up for 6 months ago that I had said nothing about. Then Nadine folded her arms and said, "There are some very nice assisted living communities nearby. You'd be around people your own age, Leonard." Gareth nodded. "It's not personal, Dad. You've just stopped being useful." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "You're right. This isn't working." I stood up, walked down the hall to the guest room and opened the closet. The suitcase was already there, already packed. I had packed it 5 days earlier, the night Gareth made a joke at dinner about putting me somewhere with a nurse on call. I knew then. I just needed them to pull the trigger. I picked up the suitcase and walked back through the living room. Gareth was calling after me, asking where I was going. I didn't answer. I walked through the front door of the house I had built with my own hands in 1987. I walked down the driveway without looking back. Floyd was already at the curb. He'd worked for me for 20 years. He knew the plan. "Morning, Mr. Whitfield," he said, taking the suitcase. I got in the back of the car. "The Omni," I said, "and call Harold. Tell him it's time." Harold Cole had been my attorney for 18 years. He was the kind of man who picked up on the first ring and never asked unnecessary questions. By the time Floyd pulled up to the Omni, Harold had already started moving. Phase 1 was simple: cut the supply lines. Every credit card Gareth and Nadine carried was a supplementary card tied to accounts I controlled. The car payments for the Range Rover and Nadine's Audi were on auto draft from a trust account Harold managed. The mortgage on the house ran through a shell company I had set up years ago specifically so Gareth would never see my name on the payment. The country club dues, the grocery delivery subscriptions, the streaming services, the gym memberships. All of it ran on my money through accounts Gareth had never once looked at closely enough to question. Harold made 4 calls and sent 2 emails. By noon, every one of those lines was frozen. I was in my hotel room eating lunch when the first call came from Gareth. I let it go to voicemail. Then the second. By 3 in the afternoon, he had called 11 times. I turned the phone face down on the desk and watched the screen light up. That evening, Nadine tried her card at a restaurant. Declined. Gareth tried his at a gas station. Declined. He called the bank and got a representative who told him the accounts had been flagged for review by the primary account holder. The representative could not tell him more than that. I know this because Harold had briefed the bank's compliance team in advance. That night, the automated mortgage payment failed to process. The servicer sent a notice. The power and water were still on because those bills were paid a month ahead, but Gareth and Nadine were starting to understand that the floor beneath them was not as solid as they had assumed. Now let me tell you about the trap. I had known for about 14 months that Gareth had a gambling problem. Sports betting mostly through a couple of online platforms. He owed somewhere around $38,000. He had been covering it by pulling from his Cornerstone Supply expense account in small amounts, never enough to trigger a full audit, but enough that my chief accountant Frank Delgado had flagged a pattern and brought it to me quietly. I had the documentation, I just needed Gareth to make a move I could record. The locked study at the house had been off limits the entire time I lived there. I told Gareth it was full of old equipment and filing boxes from the early years of the business. He had never pushed to get in, but I knew that once the money stopped, he would start looking for anything he could use. So Harold placed a folder inside the unlocked filing cabinet in that room. The folder was labeled clearly, Cornerstone Franchise Expansion, Pre-signed Agreements, 3 new locations. Inside were what looked like fully executed franchise contracts, complete with account numbers and routing information. The documents were fake, but they looked exactly right. The account numbers and routing details had been pre-registered with 2 banks and a fraud monitoring service. If anyone tried to use those contracts as collateral, the inquiry would be flagged within the hour, logged with timestamps, and reported back to Harold. I also had a camera in the hallway outside the study. I had installed the system years ago after a break-in on the street nearby. Gareth did not know the camera was there. It took 2 days. The footage showed Gareth entering the study at 11 at night. On a Tuesday, he found the folder. He spent about 6 minutes inside. He came out with his phone in his hand and made a call in the hallway, his back to the camera, but the body language said everything. Shoulders forward, voice low, nodding. By Wednesday morning, Gareth had walked into a branch of First Carolina's bank and presented the franchise agreements as collateral against a $50,000 personal loan. He told the loan officer the assets belonged to his family's company and that he had authority to leverage them. The loan officer ran the account numbers. The fraud flag came up within 40 minutes. The officer made a call to the number on file, which routed to Harold's office. Harold confirmed that no such authorization existed and that the documents in question had been reported as potentially fraudulent instruments. The bank logged the entire interaction. Timestamps, documents presented, statements made by the applicant. Gareth left the bank without the loan. I watched the security feed from my laptop at the Omni. He sat in his car in the bank parking lot for about 20 minutes before he drove away. I imagine he was trying to figure out his next move. I imagine he still believed there was a next move to make. There wasn't. Harold now had camera footage of Gareth taking documents from my private study, bank records of him attempting to use fraudulent instruments as collateral, and 14 months of expense account irregularities documented by Frank Delgado. On top of that, Dr. Clifton Mercer at Carolinas Medical had completed a full cognitive evaluation on me the week prior. MRI, memory assessments, the full battery. His written conclusion: 99th percentile cognitive function for my age group, fully competent to manage my own financial and personal affairs. Nadine had been telling people for months that I was losing my sharpness, that I got confused easily, that maybe I shouldn't be trusted to make decisions about the business. Dr. Mercer's report closed that door before Gareth could open it. The convention was in 4 days. I had one more thing to set up before then. Before I get to the convention, I want to tell you what happened when Gareth came looking for me. He assumed I was broke. That was the thing. In his mind, I was a 67-year-old retired man burning through whatever savings I had left, probably staying at a budget motel somewhere on the south side, eating fast food and feeling sorry for myself. He had never once considered that the picture he had of me might be wrong. He hired a private investigator. I found out later the man charged him $400 a day, which Gareth paid in cash because his cards were frozen. The investigator found me at the Omni in 2 days. He reported back to Gareth that the old man was staying at a downtown hotel, probably spending his last savings on a fantasy. Gareth and Nadine drove downtown the next morning. I know how they looked when they walked into that lobby because Floyd was sitting in the car across the street and described it to me afterward. Gareth in a wrinkled button-down, Nadine in sunglasses she probably thought made her look composed. They had not had hot water at the house for 2 days by that point. The water heater ran on an account that had been frozen. They walked up to the front desk and asked for Leonard Whitfield's room number. The concierge told them he could not share guest information. Gareth said he was my son and that it was a family emergency. The concierge called up to my room. I told him to let them wait in the lobby. I took my time finishing my coffee. When I came down, I was wearing a suit. Not a rental, not something I had bought for the occasion. A suit I had owned for 6 years, made by a tailor in Raleigh who had been making my clothes since the early 2000s. It fit the way a suit fits when it was built for you specifically. Gareth stared at it. I sat down across from them in the lobby seating area. A server brought me a cup of tea without being asked. That was the kind of hotel it was. Gareth recovered first. He leaned forward and lowered his voice. Dad, this has gone far enough. The cards, the mortgage, all of it. You need to fix this today. I don't need to do anything, I said. You're being irrational. You're embarrassing yourself, spending money you don't have on a hotel like this. Nadine jumped in. Leonard, we're willing to put this behind us. We understand you were upset, but you need to come home and we need to get back to normal. I looked at her. Then I looked at Gareth. I thought about the coffee mug in the sink. I thought about the words dead weight. I thought about the word useful and how my son had used it like a measurement of whether I deserved to be in a room. The house is mine, Gareth, I said. It was always mine. You've been living there because I allowed it. That arrangement is ending. You can't just take back the house. Read the deed, I said. Harold Cole will be in touch about the timeline. Gareth's face went the way it always went when something wasn't going his way. Red at the collar, jaw tight, eyes doing the thing where they got small and mean. You want to know what I think? He said, voice rising enough that a couple near the window glanced over. I think you've lost it. I think you're confused and paranoid and making decisions that are going to hurt you. And I think if I talked to a doctor, they'd agree with me. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. Dr. Clifton Mercer's evaluation. I placed it on the table between us. You're about 2 weeks late on that idea, I said. Gareth picked it up. He read the first paragraph. His jaw loosened. Nadine looked at the document over his shoulder. She didn't say anything. She just sat back in her chair like something had gone out of her. I stood up. You have 72 hours to remove your personal belongings from the property. Harold will send a full inventory list. Anything not on the list stays with the house. I walked back to the elevator. I did not look back. That afternoon, Gareth drove out to the Cornerstone Supply regional office on the east side of Charlotte. He still had his keycard. He still had his parking space. He was VP of operations, at least on paper, and he intended to use that title to do something. What he found was that his keycard no longer worked on the executive suite door. The IT department had suspended his system access 2 days earlier. He could walk into the main floor, the warehouse, the break room, but he could not access the financial systems, the supplier contracts, or the procurement records. He asked the office manager, a woman named Beverly who had worked for Cornerstone for 11 years, what was going on. Beverly told him there had been an authorization review initiated by the chairman's office and that she wasn't able to share details beyond that. Gareth stood in the lobby of the company his father had built and tried to look like a man in control of the situation. Beverly watched him with the kind of patience you develop when you've seen a lot and stopped being surprised by most of it. He left without saying much. I watched the parking lot camera feed from my laptop. He sat in his car for a while. Then he drove away. The convention was in 2 days. The annual Hardware Suppliers Convention runs 3 days every fall at the convention center in Uptown Charlotte. Every major supplier, distributor, and regional chain in the Southeast sends people. Contracts get signed. Relationships get built. Reputations get made or quietly buried. Gareth had attended the last 2 years as my representative. He had a seat at the VIP table both times. He worked the room the way he worked every room, confident and loud, telling people Cornerstone Supply was entering a new era. He let people assume things without technically lying. He was good at that. This year, he had registered himself again. Same table, same badge. He showed up on the first morning in a suit that was slightly too big for him now, shook hands with suppliers he had met before, and positioned himself near the front of the room the way he always did. He did not know I was attending until he saw the printed program sitting on his table at the opening luncheon, Industry Pioneer Award. Presented to Leonard Whitfield, founder and chairman, Cornerstone Supply, I was told later that he read it twice and then set it face down on the table. I came in through a side entrance with Harold and Floyd. We had arranged it that way deliberately. I wanted to be in the room and seated at the head table before Gareth saw me. I wanted him to have no time to prepare. The room was about 400 people. Round tables, white linens, the low noise of industry conversations and coffee cups. I had been in that room a dozen times over the years. I knew half the faces. The other half knew my name. I was seated at the head table with the event organizers and 2 regional presidents from national supply chains we had done business with for years. We shook hands. We talked about the market, normal conversation, then the program started. The MC was a trade journalist who covered the building supply industry, a man named Clifford Baines, who had interviewed me twice over the years. He was good at his job. He knew how to hold a room. He introduced the award by talking about what it meant to build something from nothing in a market that eats small operators alive. He talked about staying independent when the big chains were buying everyone up. He talked about the kind of reputation that gets built over decades, not quarters. Then he said my name. I stood up and walked to the podium. On the way I looked at the 3rd row. Gareth was sitting very still. Nadine was next to him, her hand on the table in front of her. They were both looking at me the way people look at something they cannot immediately make sense of. I adjusted the microphone and looked out at the room. I kept the speech short. I thanked the suppliers who had stuck with us in the early years when we were nobody. I thanked Frank Delgado for keeping the books honest for 15 years. I mentioned Ruth without going into detail, just said that none of it would have existed without her. Then I nodded to Harold, who was standing near the side aisle. Harold walked to the 3rd row. He stopped at Gareth's table and placed a manila envelope in front of him. Quietly, no scene. Just set it down and stepped back. Gareth looked at the envelope. He looked at Harold. He looked at me. I held his gaze for a moment and then turned back to the room to finish my remarks. Behind me, I could hear Gareth opening the envelope. I heard the sound of the paper. I heard Nadine say something in a low voice. I heard Gareth's chair scrape back. He stood up. Dad. His voice was loud enough that the tables nearby went quiet. I paused at the podium. This is an eviction notice, Gareth said. He was holding the papers up. His voice had that particular quality it got when he was trying to sound controlled and wasn't managing it. You're serving me an eviction notice in the middle of a convention. The room was quiet now, all 400 people. I looked at him. The document speaks for itself, Gareth. You have 72 hours from the time of service. Harold can answer any questions about the process. This is insane. That house is my home. I've lived there for years. You've stayed there for years, I said. There's a difference. You can review the deed with your attorney. Gareth looked around the room. He was looking for sympathy, for confusion, for anything he could use. What he found was a room full of people who had just watched a man receive a Lifetime Achievement Award get interrupted by someone demanding to know why he was being asked to leave a house he apparently didn't own. 2 of the convention's security staff were already moving toward the aisle. Nadine grabbed Gareth's arm. She was smarter than him in this moment. She understood that the room had already made up its mind. She pulled at him and he resisted for a second and then let himself be guided toward the exit. The doors closed behind them. Clifford Baines stepped back to the secondary microphone at the side of the stage and cleared his throat. Well, he said, Leonard, I think we all just got a live demonstration of why the Pioneer Award has a character clause. The room laughed. I smiled. Someone started clapping and it spread fast. I finished my remarks. I thanked the room. I walked back to my seat and drank a glass of water and talked to the man next to me about lumber prices in Q4. Outside in the parking lot, Gareth sat in his car for 40 minutes before he drove away. Floyd saw him on the way out. Said he looked like a man who had just realized the building he was standing in was actually built on someone else's land. Which, to be fair, was exactly the situation. The legal process took about 4 months from start to finish. Harold filed the civil suit for financial misappropriation the week after the convention. Frank Delgado's 14 months of expense account documentation went in as Exhibit A. The bank inquiry from First Carolinas went in as Exhibit B. The camera footage from the study hallway went in as Exhibit C. Gareth's attorney tried to argue that I had set him up. Harold let him make that argument. Then Harold played the footage. 38 seconds of Gareth walking into a room he had been explicitly told was off limits, opening a filing cabinet that was not his, and leaving with documents that did not belong to him. The judge did not have much to say after that. Gareth was removed from his VP position at Cornerstone Supply by court order. He was required to repay $38,000 in misappropriated funds, plus legal costs. The bank fraud inquiry ran on a separate track that I stayed out of. That was between Gareth and the bank and whatever attorney he could afford at that point. The house reverted to my sole occupancy. It had never legally been anything else. Nadine left about 6 weeks after the settlement. I heard about it through Floyd, who heard it from Beverly at the office. No details, just that she was gone. I did not find that surprising. She had married a man she believed was standing next to a fortune. When the fortune turned out to belong to someone else and that someone else had closed the door, there was not much left to stay for. I want to tell you about the day I went back to the house. It was a Saturday morning in February, about 3 months after the trial. I drove out there myself, no Floyd, just me in the truck. The house was empty. Harold had arranged for the locks to be changed and the utilities to stay on for the inspection. I walked through the front door and stood in the living room. I had built that room in 1987. I was 27 years old that summer. I poured the foundation myself with 2 friends from the plant and a rented mixer. I framed the walls over 3 weekends. I ran the electrical with my father-in-law, who was an electrician and came down from Greensboro to help. Ruth painted every room herself because we could not afford to hire it out. Standing there in February, the house was quiet and cold and completely still. I walked to the garage. On the back wall, on 2 nails I had put in myself 30-some years ago, hung the hammer I had used to frame those walls. It was an old Estwing wood handle worn smooth, head showing real use. Nadine had wanted to throw it out about a year into the arrangement. She said it looked like junk. I had told her it was staying. It was still there. I took it down and held it for a minute, then I put it in the truck. That hammer sits on the credenza in my office at the Cornerstone Supply headquarters. Now people ask about it sometimes. I tell them it is the first tool I ever owned that I bought with my own money, and that it built the first walls I ever built, and that it reminds me every morning why the work matters. That is the truth. About 2 years after the trial, a letter arrived at Harold's office. Plain white envelope, no return address, postmarked Charlotte. Harold forwarded it to me on the boat. It was from Nadine. She was working at a marketing firm in South End, renting an apartment on her own. She wrote that she understood now what she had been part of, that she had pushed Gareth in directions she had no right to push, and that she was not asking for anything, just wanted me to know she was sorry. I read it twice, then I put it in the drawer of the desk on the boat, next to the photograph of Ruth and me from the day we opened store number 3. Ruth is laughing in the picture because I had paint on my face from helping touch up the front window trim that morning and had not noticed until she pointed it out, right as someone took the shot. I have not heard from Gareth directly. Maybe I will someday. Maybe I won't. That part is up to him. What I know is this. I built something real. I built it with my hands and Ruth's patience and 30 years of early mornings and decisions that cost me things I did not talk about. I gave my son every advantage I never had. I gave him a title, a salary, a seat at a table that took me 2 decades to earn a place at. And when he decided I was dead weight, I walked out the front door of my own house with a packed suitcase and let him find out the hard way what the weight had actually been holding up. If someone in your life is taking what you built for granted, you already know it. You've known it for a while. The question is what you're going to do about it. Dignity isn't something you get back by arguing. You get it back by walking out the door and letting the truth do its job. If this story hit close to home, leave a comment below. And if you believe a man's work deserves to be respected, not just inherited, hit that like button and subscribe. There are more stories like this one coming.